that you give us economics for everyone, and the world would certainly be in a much better place if it listened to economists like you. There's another economist I know who gives regular people hope, and that's John Loxley. Jim, you worked with John on the first alternative budgets, as did others in this room, like Shirley Lord and Shauna McKinnon and Greg Salinger. And as has been mentioned already, John is the one who actually came up with the idea of doing alternative budgets with that grassroots organization called Choices. It's a project that lives on in most CCPA offices, and including here in Manitoba. And there's a lot of people here in this room, I think, who worked on those first budgets in the 90s. And also we have some students here today who are helping us with the 2020 alternative provincial budget. So the tradition is really living on. The appeal of the exercise, and I think this is where it's fundamentally a John thing, is in how it demonstrates budgets, democratizes budgets, and shows how governments can both be fiscally and socially responsible. In fact, John demonstrates all the time that in order to be fiscally responsible, they have to be socially responsible. And 20 years later, alternative budgets are still effective, an effective means to inspire, challenge, and educate the public and policymakers. There's many of us here today who know firsthand of John's work, whether it be at university, the Union Hall, in government, or the community. And I have been lucky enough to have had John as a professor, and now as a colleague in the Manitoba Research Alliance, and as the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues. Any ability I have to do my job as the Errol Black Chair is owed in large part to what I learned from John and the other heterodox economists that I studied with at the University of Manitoba, including Fletcher and Artisher, Robert and Ian, all of whom hold you in such high regard. John has been so important in keeping heterodox economic thought alive at the U of M, making it one of the few departments, I think, in the Western world where students can actually still get exposed to a variety of economic thought. John had a profound effect on the way I do my research, how I see my role as the Errol Black Chair, and my appreciation of what community means. The work we do at CCPA is greatly enhanced through John's willingness to run the Manitoba Research Alliance's federal government SSHRC grants through our offices. And having the MRA located in the community rather than on a university campus gives us much more credibility with the people that we actually do research with. And having a project director with John's long history working with local urban Indigenous groups and grassroots organizations like Choices also gives us street cred. John's contacts are many and his experience long. People who studied with John can be found, I think many of us can be found in this room and throughout Canada and around the world. We're working as academics, government civil service, politicians, union employees, and running community organizations. Paul Moyse noted that John Loxley has populated the left in Manitoba, and he has directly and indirectly inspired much of the progressive policy work in the province, from his ideas on community economic development to his research on public-private partnerships and social impact bonds, which has been invaluable to unions like CUPE and others, and in my own research and committee hearing presentations, and I know that's the case for many individuals as well. John has worked at the highest level of government with premiers like Greg Salinger and abroad with the likes of Nelson Mandela. But he's not afraid to roll up his sleeves and help with the grunt work. He can also be found pounding the pavement to get out the vote on election day, working with Reina, or sorting out details with a Manitoba Research grant application. And we've got a really strong team who puts those applications together for those multi-million-dollar grants, and we all work really well together, but it just wouldn't work, it wouldn't come together, and it wouldn't be possible without having John as our project director. Others have noted the way he can mix it up with government leaders and heads of banks one day or financial institutions and then interact with regular folks the next, always with kindness and quiet respect. I think it's testimony to John's appeal that so many have come to this year's brunch. The diversity of people and groups here is also impressive. Members of John's beloved Crescentwood Saturday Soccer Club are here, and their presence brings out another aspect of John's life. And this is something that Sean and I have been talking about. His ability to create a network of groups and individuals that intersect in really interesting ways and which goes back decades. His soccer buddies share his progressive values and love of sport, as do members of his family. His political allies, many with the background and choices, continue doing advocacy work with him. His academic colleagues share his politics, some play soccer with him, and colleagues from other areas of work and community groups also play soccer and work on elections with him. John's international work, especially in Africa, connects him to the newcomer community, who of course love soccer and are keen to work on community issues with him. And at the end of the day, the game, the conference, the play, the election, the strike, John always has time to share a pint with friends. Sometimes two, every now and then three. John's family is of great importance to his life, and all are supportive of his many endeavors. In fact, family members have been known to collaborate on any number of projects, from research to co-publishing, to elections, and to, of course, soccer. Here today are his partner Aurelia, his children Salim, who came from Geneva, Raina and Matthew, and unfortunately Camille couldn't make it. Camille lives in Australia. Ziba is here, and members of Aurelia's extended family are here as well. John has never forgotten that the choices governments make have tremendous influence on people's lives, for better or for worse. And he's made it his life's work to push always for better. In doing so, he has inspired generations of progressive academic and labor and social activists, showing them how, as Jim Stamford said, to keep their eyes on the sky, but their feet on the ground. John, just before I ask you to come up and speak, I'd like to turn to an aspect of your work where you have had an important impact and which a lot of people may not know about, and that's your policy work around First Nations. John, I have greetings here from Cindy Blackstock, and Cindy is the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada, and I want to share her words with you. In 2004, First Nations child welfare leaders, the Assembly of First Nations, and the federal government charged the Caring Society with developing a new funding approach to end long-standing inequalities in First Nations child welfare. One day, our then board president, Elsie Flett, and I drafted up a dream team of researchers who we knew would give the very best of their talents and skills to the children. When it came to economists, there was only one name that would do, John Loxley. His knowledge of public service economics, partnered with his track record of working respectfully with First Nations, was unparalleled. We were so grateful when he said yes. He worked among a multidisciplinary team of Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers across 20 disciplines, and the resulting funding approach was documented in the 2005 One-Day reports. Now, while Canada did not implement the resulting funding approach, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal relied on it extensively in 2016, ordering Canada to remedy the discrimination. Since 2016, First Nations children and families have received billions of dollars in services that can be tracked back to John's contribution to One-Day. Cindy finishes off by saying that John is a man of great intellect, matched by a big heart and humble disposition. He is so truly deserving of this recognition, and I am delighted to have this opportunity to thank him for everything he has done and continues to do for First Nations kids. Congratulations, John, and P.S., we're not done yet, so don't put down your pencil. Cindy. I don't think there's much more to be said after that, John. I think Cindy speaks for all of us. So please come up and bask in the glory of our gratitude and admiration.
I was doing okay until Cindy's speech there. I'd like to thank the board and staff of the CCPA for bestowing this honour upon me. I'm humbled by this recognition, and to be on the same platform as my longtime friend Jim, and to listen to his wonderfully insightful presentation is a double honour. I must confess that I was worried that the room would clear after his presentation, so I'm somewhat relieved that to this point at least so many of you have stayed. The main purpose of the occasion is, of course, to promote the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues. Since its inception in 2012, the chair has been occupied by Lynne Fernandez. Lynne has succeeded in bringing to the task the progressive economic and political insights that Errol so admirably embodied. She has been prolific in shedding light on and debunking neoliberal theories and policies, and more important, in pointing out progressive alternatives. She has been a steady voice of reason on the left and has been able to reach out to a broad Manitoba audience through her publications in the press. Errol would be proud of you, Lynne, and of what you've made of the chair named in his honour. For you have succeeded commendably in combining first-rate analysis with proposals for policies and actions to improve the lives of Manitobans. Your work makes a difference, and in this you are following closely in the footsteps of Errol. We thank you for what you do and for all that you've done. It is to help continue your important work that today's fundraiser is being held. So I would ask all of you to bring your hands together for a show of appreciation for all that Lynne has accomplished. Thank you. It's perhaps understandable that on an occasion such as this, I would ask myself, how did I end up here? And what shaped my life that I would today be speaking to a who's who of the left in Manitoba? In reflecting on this, I think there have been three distinct yet still overlapping periods of my personal formation, and I'd like to share these with you. The first is my childhood and early part of my life in Sheffield, UK, where I was born. I was one of 12 children, and my father was a steel worker who died of industrial lung disease. It's not supposed to happen. I was fortunate to have loving parents and siblings, but also I was the beneficiary of local and national governments that built a social safety net for working class families. It was the national government that brought in the 1944 Education Act that opened up secondary school education to working class children such as myself, and also, incidentally, provided free school milk. The national government also introduced the public health system in 1948 under the leadership of an Aaron Bevan, a former coal miner. The NHS operated under the principles of universality, free service at the point of delivery, equity, and central payment. It was the city council, run essentially by workers, who built public housing on a massive scale that ended waiting lists for people living in Victorian slums. It took over 20 years to address the housing backlog, but they did it. The City Council also built an extensive public library system that I relied upon heavily, there being no place to study at home. These strong supports from family, trade union activists, and progressive governments helped shape my view of the world from a very early age. They also made me deeply suspicious of neoliberalism and its emphasis on austerity, the effect of which, I believe, is to deny working class children the opportunities that I had. The second formative stage of my life was the more than a decade I spent in East Africa. I went there first as a PhD student, studying the colonial monetary system. That system channeled savings from Africa to colonial centres such as London, Every penny of currency in circulation had to be financed by an equivalent amount of money loaned to the British government in the form of securities. The rest of the colonial financial system, insurance companies, post office savings banks, and pension funds, all invested their funds in London. The system was therefore a gigantic vacuum cleaner, sucking up funds for investment in the mother country, helping maintain the poverty of the country which generated them. After decades of colonialism, there were virtually no African employees except at the very lowest levels. This helped form my views later on the colonial system to which Canadian Indigenous people were subjected. After teaching at the prestigious Makerere University in Uganda, where many well-known English political leaders throughout Africa were educated, for instance, Julius Nyerere, president of Tanzania, translated Shakespeare into Kiswahili there. I went to Tanzania to help them nationalize the commercial banking system and other parts of the economy, such as insurance and the large sisal industry. For a very young man, this was an amazing opportunity, but I was clear that it was made possible only because of colonialism's failure to train Africans. So in each of the jobs I had in Tanzania, I made it a point of finding or training an African successor. I left Tanzania after my boss in each of the places I worked, Amman and Sekela, invited me to become a Tanzanian citizen. This clashed with my object of always being replaced by a Tanzanian, and I balked at being seen to be coming into the country in a privileged way. So ironically, my boss's desire to keep me in the country eventually drove me and my family away. It was a difficult decision to leave, as I was very happy there. My two older children, Salim and Camille, were born there, and their mother, Ziba, was an East African. As it happened, I made a number of Canadian friends in Dar es Salaam, and they persuaded me to join the Schreier government as Secretary to the Resource and Economic Development Committee of Cabinet, aptly named the Red Committee. When I came for interview, I was asked, "What is the population of Tasmania?" I thought I'd found myself in the midst of a general knowledge quiz. But we eventually sorted out that I was coming from Africa, not Australia. And that's how I ended up in Winnipeg in the company of progressives, the third formative stage of my life. For many years, I was able to retain ties with Africa. Two of my most satisfying experiences were helping Tanzania and other governments develop progressive alternatives to IMF austerity programs, and working with the ANC, COSATU, and Nelson Mandela on the transition to majority rule. I've never regretted my move here, and people often ask, well, why did you stay here when you could clearly have a choice of places to live? My answer is to be found by looking around this room, and I've lost my place. It's family and friends that have kept me here and have made my life fulfilling. I've been fortunate to live a rounded life academically, politically, and socially, and the people in this room reflect these facets of my life and have helped shape who I am, warts and all. My government co-workers, union brothers and sisters, colleagues at the university, or my many students, past and present. And here I'm not going to mention any names because I'm going to miss somebody else, so no names. My colleagues at the university, all my many students, past and present, members of the Anti-Apartheid Coalition, members of Choices and Pollock's Hardware Co-op, and many of you, like Jim Stanford, who were centrally involved in the alternative federal budget exercises, community economic development workers, my drinking buddies at the Yellow Dog Tavern, my North End friends, and throughout the years, members of the, as you've heard, Crescentwood Saturday Soccer Club. All have been vital parts of my existence and the reason why I've been so happy in Winnipeg. I should add that I worked closely for many years with former Premier Greg Sullinger, who I am naming, who was then active in Choices and the alternative federal budget exercises, and I'm pleased to see him here today. From my earliest days in Canada, I was drawn to the struggles of Indigenous people against their colonial oppression, I was fortunate enough to work with a number of prominent Indigenous leaders, some well before they became prominent, and learn much from them on issues of health, education, and economic development. More recently, as you heard, it's been my privilege to assist the indefatigable Cindy Blackstock, who works relentlessly to better the lives of Indigenous children and families. Decolonizing child welfare services in Canada, compensating children and families for years of neglect and neglectful government policies and underfunding, and reducing the outrageously high number of Indigenous children in care must surely be among the highest of political priorities in our time. I know from my own experience that loving families living in poor conditions need not be separated from their children if the right supports are in place. Fixing the child welfare system must be a paramount task in achieving reconciliation in Canada. That task is not helped by the grip of neoliberal governments across Canada and their attachment to austerity. We must struggle against this on many fronts. The continued attack on public sector workers in Manitoba is unwarranted, but very costly to both workers and to those they serve. We must work with the NDP, union, and consumer groups to resist these cuts. The provincial governments aim to better align universities with the skilled labour needs of business is a serious threat to the arts and humanities, as Bob Canoe pointed out a couple of days ago, and must be resisted by UMFA with other union and wider public support. Many needs of people with disabilities remain unmet. Indeed, one of the first unannounced cuts that the Pallister government made in 2016 was to cancel a year-long exercise into an assured income program for people with prolonged and severe disabilities being conducted by the Premier's Advisory Council on Education, Poverty and Citizenship. Climate change adaptation is also a victim of in Canada of austerity and neoliberalism. There's no other political issue that brings together people of all ages, led by youth, as we saw in the Lear Gazan campaign. We must build that movement both within and outside the electoral framework with some urgency, as we are running out of time. And as we saw in the provincial election, cuts to healthcare and education at school levels remain a very real threat about which the public is aware. There is much work to be done here with nurses, other healthcare workers, and with teachers. Uzoma Azagwara's statement last week linking increased wait times to bed closures and nurse shortages was very helpful in that regard. One can see that they are fitting very nicely into the new health portfolio. We've seen in recent reports how far there is to go to achieve women's full equality, and there is continuing pressure on preserving past hard-fought gains in the area of choice. Expanding and fully accepting the rights of the LGBTQ2S community is an ongoing battle. Racism and anti-immigration remain and are growing in some parts of Canada. The related struggles against poverty and homelessness seem to be relentless. Strong political representation at all levels is vital if we are to make progress in these areas. We need also to build strong political alliances between parties, unions, and community activist organizations based on solid information and research to combat these growing problems. The Choices experience provides some guidelines here, and it also pointed to an operating style that kept up the enthusiasm of activists, drawing on humor, street theatre, and bringing out glaring inconsistencies in the position of neoliberal purveyors of austerity to promote progressive causes. One of the best examples I would draw on here is that one of our members in Choices, dressed as a London bobby, presenting the private sponsors of the former Jets, the old Jets, who were appearing before the City Council to ask for huge subsidies. That's during the time of cuts. And so they were appearing before the City Council asking for subsidies. And our member, dressed as a London bobby, appeared before them and gave the private sector man who was asking for subsidies a summons. And the summons was written on City of Winnipeg police notepaper, don't ask me how, and accused them of panhandling in public. And that was a reference to an anti-poor legislation that was brought in about that time. So that made a clear point about political choices. It was funny and ultimately received a lot of publicity because detractors sought to avoid the political issue by raising questions about the use of police notepaper. So that carried on the thing for another 2 or 3 days in the press. There is therefore much for the Errol Black Chair to tackle in assisting unions and NGOs involved in these very large political struggles that I've mentioned. And in this, the CCPA generally will have an important role. CCPA has been very important to me for years. We run the Manitoba Research Alliance, as you heard, shared partnership grant through the CCPA, and I've been privileged to work with 3 committed executive directors. Lynne has also been a key player in that relationship and is only now, this week, taking a breather from having helped us put together another grant application over the past many months. My colleagues at the MRA have also been an important part of my life for the past 17 years. I've got a large and loving family here. Salim and Camille have been joined by Raina and Matthew and their mum, Aurelia, my wife, and her family, the Mogans and Sharmas, whose support and friendship is very dear to me. So the third phase of my existence has been and continues to be one filled with interesting and challenging work alongside a myriad of firm friends and colleagues. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for coming to support the Errol Black Chair in Labour Issues and the CCPA, and Jim for his, as usual, excellent and insightful presentation. Thanks also to my friends at the Fort Garry, Rick and Ida, for once again being such splendid hosts. Thank you.